Today, my guest is someone who redefines what it means to live an intentional and impactful life. Rabbi Dr. Joe David is not only one of New York's first female rabbis, but also a speaker, educator, vegan recipe creator, and to top it off, she's also a successful Regency romance novelist. In this episode, Rabbi Joe shares how she transitioned from a career in advertising to spiritual leadership, and why inclusivity has always been at the heart of her work, whether she's officiating weddings, leading interfaith study groups, or writing books with plant-based recipes tucked inside. We talk about the challenges of navigating beloved family traditions, how she found a way to reclaim those memories through creative vegan cooking, and what inspired her to write stories where everyone deserves a happy ending. You're going to love this conversation on faith, food, fiction, and finding your purpose in every season of life. Let's get the party started. Welcome to the Wild Party Podcast, where we celebrate the visionaries behind vegan, ethical, and sustainable business. In each episode, we'll dive deep into their journeys, uncovering the why behind their mission-driven business. I'm your host, Stephanie Lahart. Tune in with me for passionate discussions about overcoming challenges, innovative marketing strategies, and the power of using business as a force for good. So whether you're an entrepreneur seeking guidance or a conscious consumer wanting to support impactful brands, join us as we explore the stories behind the businesses that are changing the world for the better. Let's get the party started. And today I am delighted to welcome to the podcast Rabbi Dr. Joe David. She is an entrepreneur in the truest sense of the word, having so many different aspects of her life. I just told her in our pre-conversation, I feel like this needs to be a 4-hour podcast because not only was she one of the earliest female rabbis in New York, she has gone on to have many different aspects of her career develop and be successful, from being a rabbi to being a speaker to now being a romance novel writer, which, by the way, was always my dream. So we're going to have to talk about that a lot. And along the way, she has now dedicated her life to being a vegan as well, and really being outspoken about a vegan lifestyle, and so far as actually creating vegan recipes for the Jewish community. In fact, I've heard your brisket is just something I have to try. So I do want the recipe. I want all of your secrets. You're actually kind of my secret hero at this point. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really delighted to be here with you and to talk about all these different things.
Oh my goodness. I feel like you were one of those people that when I first became aware of you and they said, oh, well, she is a rabbi who has turned vegan and she's done this recipe. I thought, oh, maybe it'll be kind of a cooking show. And then I started doing my research and I'm like, oh my goodness. Not only is she a rabbi who is like changing the face of how people interact. I mean, you do these inclusive wedding ceremonies. You're really outspoken about making sure everybody is in the conversation. Obviously, as a female leader in any aspect, I'm on board with that. But then I find out you're a romance novel writer in the Regency era, which, oh my goodness. But we have to start at the beginning.
Okay.
First, what led you in your life to decide the Jewish faith is so important to me? I want to be a rabbi and I want to help further the word and bring this into people's lives. Where did that all start from? Because back in the day, this was a bit more of a challenge and not as accepted.
That's absolutely true. When I was growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, and my family was not religious. My grandparents with whom we lived were immigrants from Ukraine. And my grandfather was a communist. He was a colonel in the Red Army. And he actually defected. My grandmother, who must have been about 20 or 21 at the time, was very disenchanted with communism. And she said, this isn't real, true communism. We need to go to America. And they did. They went with he defected and they went with their whole family and came here in the early 1920s. And, I knew my grandmother when she was older, right? She was my grandmother. And I never thought until very recently that in the early 20s, she was only 19 or 21. And it made me have a completely different idea about who she was and where I come from. Because I always wanted to be out there, be on the cutting edge, do something new, do something different, uh, be visible. At a time when in the 50s, when I was growing up, women were not visible. Um, and I realized that my grandmother was, that's what she was. She was a groundbreaker. She understood that they needed to get out of Ukraine and get away from the pogroms if there was going to be any type of life. So in my growing up, I think that both, but my mother too. My mother, after she got married, went back to college and got a bachelor's degree. She was Phi Beta Kappa at Brooklyn College, and then went on and got a master's in guidance and was a guidance counselor for most of her life, and was always trying to think of new things to do. And so I think I come from a line of women who see themselves somewhat differently in the world, who I don't think they would have put it this way, but I'm putting it this way. I think they were groundbreakers. And without even realizing it, maybe there was no language like that when they were growing up in the 40s and 50s. But in my house, I'm coming to understand now that there was a subversive element. Even though my parents were very aspirational, my father was from a family of German Jews who had been here for quite some time, for several generations, and they were moving up in society. It was very important to them. But there was this other undercurrent of what makes a good life, and it wasn't typical things. And so I think I got this message non-verbally that it was okay, even though my mother wanted me to be a school teacher and marry and have a family and be very kind of middle-class suburban. Underneath that, I think there was a feeling of you need to get out there. You need to change things. The world needs to be better. That I think that was very much alive, unspoken in our family. When I was growing up, there were no female rabbis. Women didn't become ordained until 1972 in the most liberal, in the Reform movement, the most liberal form of Judaism. And I always felt very spiritual, but I never thought of being a rabbi. And even when I began to think about it, it was so hard for me to accept that I could be a rabbi. And I would say to my husband, Neil, you should be a rabbi. And when my son became a bar mitzvah, he was so wonderful on the bima. I said to Neil, Justin should be a rabbi. And actually, Justin became a rabbi. I didn't tell him that that was my aspiration for him, because if you to become a rabbi, it needs to be self-motivated. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So I never told him, but I was so delighted when he told me he was going to go to rabbinical school. And by that time, of course, I was a rabbi myself, but I was going on and on about everybody else. All the men in my family should be rabbis. And one day Neil said to me, maybe you're the one who wants to be the rabbi. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. But actually inside, I was saying, yes, 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 that's what I want. And it happened because we were living in San Francisco, and it was a very different kind of Jewish experience for me. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn and then later on Long Island, and have spent most of my adult life living in Manhattan. So it's New York is Jewish, whether you're Jewish or not, it's Jewish. And when we went out to San Francisco, it was different. It has a much smaller Jewish population. I had never lived any place where I was not in what I felt was a majority. Uh, Even though, of course, Jews are not a majority, but New York is the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. And so there is a feeling in New York of being surrounded by Jewishness. But in San Francisco, it wasn't like that. And the things that I took for granted about being Jewish, even though I wasn't religious, weren't there. And so, and I wasn't meeting anybody. We were in business. My husband and I were in business together. We had an ad agency. And I started to go to synagogue because I thought I'll meet Jews in a synagogue. I wasn't meeting anybody Jewish. It felt very strange. And I found the service, even though I'd been to synagogue before, but I'd never gone on a regular basis. And going on a regular basis, I was confused about what was going on. I didn't speak Hebrew. Even though most of the service was in English, it didn't make sense to me. But I had made a commitment to myself to go. And for an hour and a half, I had to figure out how to distract myself because I just couldn't follow what was going on. And so I started analyzing the service the way one does when one is in marketing. This works, this doesn't work. And I found myself thinking, well, if I were the rabbi, what would I be doing? How would your product is Judaism, you're delivering it through this service. How do you do that? And how do you do it so people like me understand what's going on? And one day I found myself thinking, I could do this. And over time, it became clear to me that not only could I do it, but that I would like to do it, and that it would be a way of helping people in a variety of ways, that I was not really, I wasn't fulfilling my aim of helping people, which I always wanted to do, by selling products, salad dressing and coffee and things like that. I was in the food service industry, and that's what we did. And I loved it. It was great. It was so creative, and you met all kinds of interesting people, and I did a lot of traveling, and it was fabulous. But I had one of the reasons I went to synagogue also was because I was looking for something else. Being in advertising wasn't, I felt, a good enough use of my life. You know, one's life is a very precious gift. You don't know how much time you have. And I wanted to make my life mean more. And that's how I got started.
You hit it right there on the head. I feel we're very trained as a society now where we're so focused on success equals money, career, and you get really thrown into that pathway very quickly early on in your life. And we don't spend a lot of time thinking, well, what is my purpose or what brings me joy or what was I truly meant to do? And I kind of followed the same route as you, whereas I had this career in marketing and was successful and enjoyed it. And then I realized, well, I'm not really enjoying my life, though. I don't feel like I'm adding to the world. So along my way, I was able at one point to actually start a breast cancer foundation and help women through that, which I loved. And then as I still was developing my ad business, I was like, well, I want to make sure that people that are developing products and services are able to, get the promotion and the awareness that they need to be successful so that people know that this is available, which is how this podcast came about. So I understand your journey. And also what you said really rang true with me, where you were like, I'm analyzing this sermon through a marketer and advertiser's eyes, because I do that with everything. And I wondered, is that me or is it because I'm an advertiser? But you just answered it. It's because our brains are trained now to really, I think analyze the message in every aspect. So I get that with you. Yeah. Like I said, we have so many things in common. This conversation is just really lighting me up right now. So, going along the lines, and now you're a rabbi and you have a personal practice. I noticed that you did do a lot of really unique things like officiating weddings for very diverse couples, including interfaith and LGBTQ unions. So, really, what drove you to really want to make sure that these ceremonies were very inclusive and that you were reaching out to these groups? Because, the day that we're in now in 2025, a lot of these things that we were taking for granted the last few years, people are realizing that our rights and our privileges are very, very, teetering on maybe disappearing. So you're still very outspoken. And what brought you to that moment in your life to know that you wanted to do that?
Um, I find that people who are pushed to make change do it for personal reasons. In my case, my brother married someone who was not Jewish and they became evangelical Christians. And it was at a time when I was becoming more religious. I wasn't a rabbi yet. I was kind of I was on the path, but I had not entered rabbinical school yet. And they they wanted to be married by a rabbi and a priest. And this was in the 70s, mid 70s. In the mid 70s, it was almost impossible to find a rabbi who would even talk to a mixed couple, a mixed religious couple. What ended up happening is that they got married in my sister-in-law's home with a deacon from her church. And my brother felt very rejected by the Jewish community. So at that point, they were not evangelical Christians, but a few years into their marriage, there was some circumstances that led my brother to look for a spiritual solution to a problem he was having. And he fell in with a group called Jews for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Jews for Jesus presents the idea that Jews can also be Christians, which is not possible. But they make a very convincing argument. And people who don't know too much about Judaism, and especially for mixed marriages or in mixed dating relationships, it's very seductive. And he went into that, and because he felt rejected by Judaism, this was very tempting to him, and he liked it. His wife got involved in it. Before we know it, they're evangelical Christians who were turning to the rest of my Jewish family and saying, you would be so much happier if you invited Jesus into your life. It was an extremely difficult time, and we weathered it. But I remember saying to my mother at the very beginning of this, if he converts and he's now a Christian, we have to sit Shiva for him, because the traditional view of, it's funny how people who are not that religious suddenly go to the religious extreme, right? Because also from a lack of understanding and knowledge. And my mother said, I'm not doing that. I want my grandchildren. And that struck me as being right. That you shouldn't. From her, I learned that just because people make choices that are different from the choices that their family makes, they shouldn't be rejected. It's because you lose not only those people, but the people who come after them. There's a saying in Judaism that if you save one life, you save the world. And what that means is that you save all the generations who would come from that life. And that started me thinking differently about interfaith unions, about what LGBTQ issues, and And when I went into rabbinical school, I thought, if I'm going to be a rabbi, I could make this better. I could perhaps be able to um, save couples who are going on this path. I mean, um, once a couple just gets together, you don't have the right to break them up. And if they decide it's not working, it's one thing. But if they come to you for guidance, for help, you have to help them. You have to educate them. You have to let them know that you understand what they're going through. And hopefully you can find a way from this is from a Jewish perspective. Um, if they're a couple, if they're getting married, uh, if maybe find a way so that the children will be Jewish and will find a place in the Jewish community. At the very least, maybe have some kind of Jewish education. And as I was going through rabbinical school, I became acutely aware of numbers because, for Christians, it's not a big deal when Christians intermarry with some other group because there's something like a billion Christians or 1.5 billion Christians and a similar number of Muslims in the world. And if they lose one or two to some other religion, it's not a big deal. Uh, it doesn't threaten the survival of Christianity. But Judaism, at the best count, there are about 16 million Jews in the entire world. And when we lose one, proportionately, that is a tremendous loss. So it becomes, what often will happen when an interfaith couple comes for counseling is that the Christian, or not usually the Muslim, usually the Christian, in my experience, the Christian partner will say, well, so and so said this minute, at the minute our minister said he has no problem with this. Well, yeah, he has no problem with this because it's not, first of all, Christians are the dominant religion in American society. We basically live in a Christian society, and any minority group that wants to raise its children within their cultural context and their religious context is fighting an uphill battle against both Christianity and assimilation, secularism, all three. And it's really hard to instill a strong minority value and minority identity in a child who lives in the world. I mean, that's why very religious, I don't like to use the words traditional or religious, but religious groups that stay to themselves and keep in their own communities and have their own schools and have their own social programs. The reason they do it is because from their point of view, that's the only way that you can keep the children within this minority culture. And it's not only Judaism. We have many minority cultures that operate that way in America. And Christians don't, they don't worry about it.
Right. So yeah, I can hear that. And from what I'm hearing from you, it's like really your level of compassion and need for acceptance and understanding has been a driving force for you, which I'm fully the same way. I look at certain situations in the world and I'm like, I don't understand why you would try to stop somebody from living their truth, like let them be who they are. Because I truly believe what you just said to me resonated so deeply about saving one life saves the world. and not only with people but also with animals and with nature too. And that was the other thing that really spoke to me when I got introduced to that. They said, well, she is a rabbi and she leads these inclusive services, and she also in her life now has decided to become a vegan and publish these vegan recipes, which I was like, oh. Because one of the things for me being a vegan, because now I've been vegan for 10 years, prior to that vegetarian, is the fact that, food is part of culture. It is part of familiar celebrations. It's ingrained in a way so you can't just walk up to somebody and say, you are not allowed to eat this anymore, because food has many more connotations more than nourishment. And you understand this, I think at a deeper level, coming from Judaism, there are things that we do and the way we do them that is part of our belief and our family and our culture. And food is an element of that. So how do we then start to say, well, veganism is important in this way, and without taking that very important, part away. So tell me how you're approaching that now beyond the recipes. First of all, what led you to, veganism, and how are you now moving forward and maybe sharing the message? What does that look like for you?
Right. So, I had a kind of a funny experience with vegetarianism. I had a friend who was the head of the Jewish Vegetarian Society. And this many years ago, I was a new rabbi and we were talking, and he said to me, "Are you a vegetarian?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'll pray for your soul." And I was very affronted by that. I was very put off by that because the judgment implied in that um, it did not sit well with me. There's enough judgment in the world. I strongly feel that it's very important to try to detect that in ourselves and not to judge people, right? We should love them, and if we think they're doing something to hurt themselves, we should try to help them not hurt themselves. But judgment is another thing, and there are so many judgments about food and what you eat. When I started becoming religious and was having these thoughts about becoming a rabbi, at the time I ate everything. Neil ate everything. And I said to Neil, I think I would like to try becoming kosher and cutting out some of the things in our diet that are not kosher. And he agreed to, since I'm the cook, he agreed to go along with that. And we started by not eating what we called visible pork. In other words, we ate a lot we were living at the time, this was in San Francisco, we were living in a predominantly Chinese middle-class neighborhood. It was great, great Chinese food. We ate Chinese food every night. And we ate a lot of pork. So we stopped ordering the pork dishes, and we didn't eat ham, and we didn't eat pork chops and things like that. But we would eat pork dumplings because it was not visible pork. That was how we started our transition. Because I realized that, at least for us, the only way we were going to get to a point where we could be fully kosher would be to do it one food at a time. And so that's how we started. So I had the experience of going from one type of eating and one type of diet to another over a period of years, actually. And I have to admit that the last thing to go that was not kosher for me was lobster. I spent 4 years telling myself that I could order lobster if I wanted to, but I didn't. I mean, that was until I finally said, okay, no more lobster, because my understanding was that once I said no more, then it was no more. I didn't think for me, I didn't want to have the kind of diet where I cheated, which people will do, and in Judaism, you often had people who kept kosher at home, but they ate in Chinese restaurants and they would eat shrimp and things like that, non-kosher food out. And that was another kind of keeping kosher, which was fine with me. I don't judge it, but I didn't want to do that. For me, being kosher was about my relationship with God, because every time you sit down and to eat something, you have there's a communication, whether you're God-centered or not. The food comes from especially here in the United States, from most of us who are urbanized, it comes from a place you didn't grow it. It comes to you because you are privileged enough to have enough money to buy it, to prepare it, to sit down and eat it. It's a tremendous gift. And so there is a kind of respect that you have to have for the food that's in front of you. And because of that, I felt that if I said no shrimp, there was not going to be any more shrimp. What started to happen about 8 years ago, I suddenly found myself thinking that I didn't want to eat anything with a face. And I had been a vegetarian for 3 years earlier on, and it didn't really work for me. I had thought I had been on a spiritual retreat, and I decided that I was going to be a vegetarian. And it totally confused my mother, who was a fabulous cook, and food was very important, and Jewish food was very important. And when I came home and said, I'm not eating this, I'm not eating the lamb, I'm not eating, it was bad enough when we became kosher, but now I'm not eating meat. And that was a real problem for her. And every time we had a family dinner, we would have long discussions about the menu. And she would say to me, and why are you doing this? She really couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. But when I came out of becoming a vegetarian and started eating meat again, there were some things that I didn't eat anymore, and lamb was one of them. And it was because the thought of eating lamb and what lambs are, I just couldn't anymore. And that seemed to be growing, that feeling. And I remember going to see a movie, specifically going downtown to see a movie about the animal processing industry. And I was horrified. And in my mind, there was a little voice that said, this is going to happen. You're on this path. And I was fighting it because I knew that it was going to be such a major change, not only in my life, but in Neil's life and in our family's life. And I went to the doctor, and she said to me, I have type 2 diabetes, and I've always had a problem with my weight. And she said to me, if you went on a plant-based diet, you could, what she's told me was, you can turn your diabetes around. I found that was true for about a minute, actually, once I became, but it did help me. I lost over 30 pounds. And I kept it off. Suddenly, something I had never been able to do as a vegan, eating a very satisfying diet, I was suddenly in control of my weight at a level that better controlled my A1C, and seemed to give me more energy. I was no longer obsessed with food, and I was very happy with it. And I didn't care that people around me were eating other things. That's never mattered to me. Even when we were kosher and we'd go out and people would eat things that were not kosher, I don't care. I care about me and my relationship with food. The hardest thing was that suddenly all of the dishes, the family dishes for holidays, that were passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me, I could no longer eat. That was extremely difficult.
Yeah, so then you become isolated because you're missing out on these family traditions and you feel like you're not part of the group. And that's very hard, which again brings me back to when, you're simply just saying to someone, change your diet, it's a bigger conversation. So how did you navigate that then to, say, well, I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to start developing these recipes and share them with people.
Well, the first thing I realized, I joined a couple of Facebook groups for vegans, and some were better than others, but it was helpful for me to see what people were doing. I didn't know anyone else who was a vegan. Neil was a vegan not by choice. I didn't care what he did when he went out, when he was at work or outside, but at home we were vegans. And but we didn't do it all at once. I did it similarly to what we did when we became kosher. I did it a meal at a time. When I chose breakfast, I thought breakfast, because for some reasons breakfast is the hardest meal for me.
Mhm.
So I thought, when I can figure out and work out and have breakfast under control, then I'll go on to lunch. And that's what I did. It took me about 8 months to get to where I was eating 3 vegan meals a day. And what I did is I tried to cut down on the other things that were not vegan in the other meals, but I didn't worry about it. I just focused on the one thing. Um, and then I tried to make my first Passover. I attempted a recipe for vegan matzo balls, and it was a mess. It was a mess for 3 years, um, until I gave in. And this is how I feel about anything that is radically different from the society. You have to be able to live.
Mhm.
You have to be able to find some place of comfort that allows you to fulfill your needs, and as in terms of what you want to accomplish, and at the same time to deal with other feelings, that especially feelings about food, that are important to you. One year at Passover, the thing about matzo balls, for those people who are listening who don't know, is that there's basically nothing unvegan about a matzo ball. It's matzo flour, um, and you can put a little oil in it. Now, it's not, I became initially a whole food SOS vegan. So no salt, no sugar, no oil, very hardcore. It was extremely helpful to do that. It was a Kickstart program through the JCC in Manhattan. It was a wonderful program. But I couldn't sustain that. I needed a little oil. I needed a little sugar. And I decided that that was okay, because I continued to lose weight. My A1C continued to go down. I felt good. So the thing about matzo balls that's not vegan is it has eggs in it.
Mm.
Now, it doesn't have a lot of eggs. It has maybe 2 for a whole batch of matzo balls. So one matzo ball has a dusting of egg, you might say. And I decided that I would give myself permission on Passover to eat one matzo ball, one regular matzo ball that has a little egg in it. And that for me, that was the way to stay connected to this recipe that was very, very important in our family, um, and not to feel left out, and not to continue to beat my head against the wall with this vegan matzo ball recipe that never worked out.
Mhm.
I mean, I, for me as a cook, I think the worst thing is when you have a recipe that's supposed to work and you do it over and over and over and it doesn't work, and then you're so frustrated. I decided that I didn't have to be frustrated, that I could have a matzo ball, even to go crazy, two matzo balls once a year. And that's kind of how I managed it. But I also decided that I was going to try very hard to develop recipes that would be traditional and vegan. And that and my jackfruit brisket is the case in point, because initially jackfruit, I never ate jackfruit. I had no idea what it was. The first year I tried it, I got the wrong kind of jackfruit and it was a disaster. But once I learned what you have to actually use, and of course using the right ingredients helps. Jackfruit absorbs, it's like tofu, it absorbs um, anything that you put it in. So if you make a good brisket sauce, which is all vegan, and you put the jackfruit in it, and it's all nice and shreddy and everything, it's like a shredded brisket. It's wonderful, and it's very satisfying to make and to eat at holiday festivals when I would have been eating brisket. So now I can eat brisket too.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, especially what we're seeing in the food market now, where, they're developing so many of these meat alternatives. And then I will have, friends and family with me around the holidays like, well, why are you just eating something that's a replicate of meat? If you want meat so bad, just eat it. And I'm like, no, I'm just partaking in this so I can still be part of the family and not feel like a weirdo outsider, because you have those, you want to feel included. Like, as human beings, we have that internal need always to be part of some group. It usually starts with the family unit, right? And to feel like you're not part of the family is really isolating. I struggled a lot in the beginning, just feeling like very awkward around my own family. I didn't want to go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't want to be around for these dinners that were centered around things like turkey and ham, like you said, because I felt ostracized so much. But now, my family was always very, very much supportive of me. They didn't make me, they weren't mean to me, but I felt other. So when I hear, people like you that are developing very traditional, maybe even culturally based recipes, I'm like, yes, this is what we need. So then we can still show up to the table and still feel included and not feel other, because that would make it harder to be in the world and as a human. So, with that said, you brought up the holidays and we're talking about Christmas, and I have to bring this up. You wrote a romance novel that had a Christmas title or theme, which I'm telling you right now, I was almost late for our podcast because I started reading one of your books on Amazon right before we got on. Listen, this is my world, the Regency romance. Like I said, when I was growing up, my dream was to be a romance novel writer, and not just a romance novel writer, but historical romances. I love that it's such a big market, and I can still live my dream like you. I've been reinventing myself my whole life. So tell me where this journey led you to starting to write romance novels, from being a rabbi to being, an outspoken in the vegan community, to now I'm going to write historical Regency romance novels.
Good. You should. You should. You should do it if you want to, if you have stories to tell. I fell in love with romance novels um, early in my rabbinic career. I started reading them. I was a congregational rabbi. My father had just died. When my father died while I was in Kazakhstan. We're doing some work with a community there. And I came back and did the funeral. And I was just, you can imagine, a mess. And then I started my first full-time rabbinic job. And it was in a very difficult situation. And I needed to find something that I could read that would just take me out of my situation. And I thought, well, romance, nothing bad ever really happens, or if it happens, it always has a happy ending. So I started reading Barbara Cartland romances, and I kind of graduated into other things. And I've been a professional writer all my life, but I had never been able to write a novel, anything of novel length. I couldn't quite sustain the focus. And even if you're writing short novels, and you can get away with writing 50 or 60,000 word novels these days because people pref seem to prefer that.
Yeah.
Um, that still requires a good 8 to 12 weeks of work every 6 days a week. It's a lot of work. It's very, very focused for the first draft. We won't even talk about the editing, but the first draft is a lot. And I I could never do it. I could never sustain it. Um, I guess it was around 2010. I decided that I was going to blog every day um, to lead up to 9/11, the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I had struggled with PTSD after 9/11, and it was very difficult. And I was by 2010, I was coming back to myself. And one of the things that I found was that I miraculously, the thing that I could not do before that, I could suddenly sustain writing every day, writing 1,000 words every day. And that's when I started. I did that. I did it for an entire year, marking every single day leading up to that anniversary. And after that, I wrote a novel. Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides is coming out in a couple of days. It's the first novel that I wrote. It's the third novel that our imprint, Pinfeather Press, has published within the last 11 months. And it's about a man who can turn into a raven at will. It was an idea that came to me in a dream. I was thinking about writing a Regency romance, and um, I didn't know what I was going to write about. And I had this dream, and I woke up in the morning and I wrote it all down. And I thought, well, how would a man who can turn into a raven, what would his problems be in terms of his love life? And that's what Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides is about. It's actually two novels. This is volume one. Volume two will be out in June or July. Revenge of the Evil Earl. And it's it's a story, it's a romantasy. When I wrote this, the people around me who knew I was, and it was a very small group because I didn't tell anybody. It was a big secret because a rabbi is writing a romance. People suddenly think like you're you're Dr. Ruth writing a romance, if you will, which is not so far from the truth. Um, but people have funny ideas about what rabbis are and who they are and what they should do and not do. And it was my story to tell, and I told it in a way that I wanted the reader to understand something about difference that usually you don't find in romances. Romances deal with a lot of different things, but in this book, there are a lot of people who have all different types of differences. And the story deals with how for some people those differences are wonderful, and for some people they're not. And everybody deals with being different. Every human being has something that, even if they objectively don't seem different, everybody has that feeling that there is something about them that makes them different. And if only they could be like everybody else, they would be so much happier, right? And I wanted to deal with that, and that's what this book deals with, besides being somewhat spicy and having a happy ending, of course.
I went to a writers conference many years ago. It was a workshop or something specifically about romance novel writers, and I remember something that they told me. They said, "You get your heroine up a tree, out on a branch, and throw rocks at her." And that is the premise of a romance novel. I'm like, that is perfect. But I love that you are now tying into the fact that, you know what, you can really explore all these other ideas and topics within that story, kind of cloaked in there. Like you said, you know, the otherness of it, figuring out like how to live differently in the world and tie the romance novel aspect into it. Because the one thing that ties us all together is we all need love and we're all looking for it. And I think, like you, the thing that I really like about the romance novel genre is, you know, the happy ending. You know, no matter what happened in the book, something at the end, you know, is rectified to where it's like, oh, that worked out. And that's not something we see in real life all the time. So that is nice.
Yeah. You mentioned I wrote a Christmas book.
Hmm.
Christmas book is also a romantasy. It's based on the Norwegian legend that on midnight on Christmas Eve, animals can talk in the human tongue.
Right. And that one's called Anarchy at Almax. And I
No,
just want to
that's
say,
no. That's Midnight Miracle.
oh, Midnight Miracle. Okay.
Anarchy at Almax is about three redheaded young women who come to London for the season and take London by storm.
Oh, okay. Because I read the quote about that one that said it's Gossip Girl meets Bridgerton meets Jane Austen,
Yes,
which I love that quote.
that's Anarchy. Thank you. Yeah, that Leah Grisham, she was very kind.
Oh, that was funny. Okay, so go back to the Christmas novel then. Sorry to interrupt it. Go.
So the Christmas novel is about a young girl who's an orphan, with basically no one to protect her, with three evil guardians who want to marry her off to somebody. I don't know, for some reason, all the earls in my books are evil. um, I'll have to think more about that. But the they want to marry her off to this very disreputable earl who's going to share her inheritance with them. And he plans to just take her off to his lair in Ireland, impregnate her, and leave her there. That's basically. And she wants to find her true love. She's been looking for the name of her true love, and she goes through all these different rituals, which are all based on actual rituals, by the way, um, and to try to find the name of her true love. And she is told by a fortune teller that if she does certain things on New Year's Eve, and she goes into the barn to see her friends, there are two horses, a pony, and a lovely little donkey, that perhaps they can help her. And of course she finds her. There is a stable master. It's got to be if you have horses, you have to have a stable master. And she does find true love, and of course there's a happy ending. But when I wrote it, my editor, my creative partner, Jim Gaynor, said to me, you know, you're a rabbi and you're writing a Christmas story, and what are people going to think? And so he suggested that we surround the story with a storytelling technique where there's another narrator.
Mm.
It's like in the, you know, in the Princess Bride, Peter Falk comes and he's reading the story to Fred Savage, his grandson, and then you see, and that's kind of the technique that we use for this book. I wasn't convinced that we needed to do that, but Jim is right 99 out of 100%, sometimes 99 out of 100% times. So we did that. And so there's this nice little frame around the story that where someone else is the narrator rather than Nola. But all of my books have book club discussion questions. They have glossaries of Regency terms, and they all have recipes. And the recipes are either they're vegan or I give vegan alternatives, because nobody this drives me crazy. There are some other authors who put recipes into their books. Nancy Atherton, who writes the Aunt Dimity stories, which are wonderful, cozy mysteries, always has a recipe, usually a baking recipe in the back. But then no one thinks about vegans, and vegans feel really left out. And most of the time, you can make a recipe vegan with a non-vegan alternative. Sometimes it's easier. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do a joint of ham, you can't do that, right? But one gets to choose what recipes goes into the book. And so I have chosen to always feature recipes that are either vegan or vegetarian, which can be made vegan, so that my readers have a lot of options. And I'm hoping that we also have all these recipes on my website, NolaSt.James.com. And we're actually reissuing Midnight Miracle for Christmas again, for the holiday season, this year with more recipes.
That's fantastic. I didn't even pick up on the recipe part, just becoming aware of you in the last week. So really, when I looked at your website, I did see the area that you were talking about fashion and then about the Regency era. And I was like, oh, this is great. It's like educational too. So she's teaching the readers, like, what the true history behind some of this. And now that you're telling me, oh, there's also these vegan recipes, I'm like, oh my goodness. Literally, you're my favorite person, because you're right. I would read other books, they would have recipes, and there would be most of them I would never make. So, wow, you're just filling me so much joy right now. It has been such a delight to speak with you, Rabbi Joe. Oh my goodness. You are like, I don't know, you're my hero right now. You're living the life I want to live. So I have a couple more years to catch up to you. I still have time. There will be a romance novel in my future as well. But in the meantime, I'm going to read all your books. As I advise all of our listeners out there, please go to her websites to check them all out. Of course, if you want to find the books, she writes under the name, which is Nola St. James. And you can find that website at NolaSt.James.com. And then your rabbi website, what is the website for that one?
RabbiJoeDavid.com.
RabbiJoeDavid.com. So please go check out both of them. This lady is just a wealth of information and just really, a guidance in the way. It's a beautiful way to live a life. And thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been so much fun talking to you. I really have enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Party Podcast. If you're an entrepreneur or professional who would like to be on this podcast, please visit boomtownmarketing.com and click on podcast. We believe that every business has the potential to change the world for good, and we want to support our community to help make the world more ethical, compassionate, and sustainable for all future generations to come. And if you're looking to build your business, no matter what level you're at now, request your free marketing consultation at boomtownmarketing.com and click Get Started.